My dear Mrs. X, thank you so much for your detailed letter dated June 15th, 2022. Not only did I find it to be a great read, due in part to the vast array of subjects either extensively covered or passively touched on, but I was also struck by the eloquence and thoughtfulness with which you presented your points and inquiries. The correspondence left me with so much to reflect and contemplate that even though I have read it 3 times, I still find myself twice or thrice a day giving it a cursory glance. Before I begin the process of addressing the contents therein, I'd like to start by apologizing for taking this long to respond. The main reason for my tardiness lays in the fact that your letter found me just as I was about to embark on a solitary tour of Northern Virginia and parts of DC, and thus didn't actually read it until I was well on the way. Every now and then my restlessness forces me to take long road trips, as I find the experience to be a calming influence, one that helps with both my bouts of melancholy and the constant vortex of seemingly unending thoughts and ideas, not all of them good, that seems to swell and or take refuge within my brain. I did think long and hard about how to craft a response to your inquiries and decided that it will be better to do so in no particular order and just focus on presenting them as straightforward and honestly as I possibly can. So here goes. You asked about my quote, guiding principles of life, end quote, which you prefaced by saying you wondered what they could possibly be considering I'd given up on the religion of my parents. So I'm tackling this particular inquiry on the premise that it is your belief that every individual should have a guiding principle by which they live or build their lives on. If that's the subtext of your question, then I want you to know that you and I are in complete agreement, and I will thus proceed from there. So my philosophy is built on the firm belief that our bodies, like everything in the universe except perhaps energy, is made up of atoms. And sooner or later, these atoms that had once come together to form the unique entity that is every individual will disperse, which will be the end of life. Contrary to the religion of my childhood, I no longer hold the belief that we will go on to exist after death. This life is it, and all those terrors that most religions are notorious for threatening people with after their death is, in my view, superstitious nonsense. Death, or the dispersal of our atoms, is final. Since I am then a materialist who believes that non-existence is our inescapable destiny, my goal is to focus on navigating this life as best as I can. And to help guide me to those ends, I have adopted the teachings of 3 different philosophers. Now, I'm not sure how deeply you like me to delve into each of their works. I'll be happy to go into more details if you need me to, but for now, I think it'll suffice to give you a brief synopsis of my takeaway from their works. The first is the 3rd century BC Greek philosopher Epicurus, who posited that liberating ourselves not only from the fear of death, but of life is a great start. The point of life, according to him, is ultimately to attain what he referred to as ataraxia, and by that he meant serene calmness or peace of mind derived from the relative absence of physical and mental pain. He recommends getting there by living simply, that is, by mostly focusing on pursuing our natural and necessary desires, food, water, shelter, and satisfying them in moderation. He also recommends living in agreement and appreciation of nature or our natural surroundings. The communities he formed was open to anyone, including women and slaves, which of course drew a great deal of criticisms and antagonisms from the surrounding societies. The Epicurean philosophy is in a lot of ways similar to what we will today refer to as liberal humanism. In fact, while I'm not big on labels, as I think we humans are way too complex for them, being an Epicurean is almost identical to saying one is a liberal humanist. As far as guiding principles go, I find its maxims to be sound and a close representation of what I believe and try to adhere to. The second person whose works I fervently pursue is 18th century Scottish philosopher David Hume, who posited that passions rather than reason govern human behavior, and that ethics are based on emotions or sentiment rather than abstract moral principle. To me, he, more so than anyone, explained why vast stretches of human time have elapsed with no successful challenges to stupidity, superstition, and unchecked authority. Once it becomes clear that injustice and irrationality are inevitable parts of the human condition, then one begins to understand why, as he said, trying to be rational about everything is a special kind of madness. Rationality in a world where people are guided mostly by their feelings and emotions can only get you so far. It took the works of David Hume for me to fully understand this concept. The third philosopher is often marginalized. In fact, most students of philosophy refuse to recognize her as one, and that's Ayn Rand and her philosophy of objectivism. Her ideas are very well expressed in her two famous novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, and what I got from reading those two books can simply be summarized as self-sufficiency. Having confidence in your abilities and developing them to their full potential so you can rely on them without need of any other person or persons. That, I agree, is the main key to a fulfilling life. As to the question of whether or not these guiding principles makes me happy, I hesitate to respond precisely because happiness is one of those ambiguous terms which I do not hold in high esteem, precisely because of how subjective it is. Happiness is, after all, a temporary state of mind, one that is vulnerable to changing circumstances and deportment. So if by happiness you're asking whether I find these philosophies sound or somewhat fulfilling, then yes, I think so. As philosophies go, these are more compatible to my view of life than any I have come across. I must end here for now, as my attention is being sought elsewhere, but I promise to tackle the rest of your inquiries when I get back to Roanoke. I'm not sure when that will be, but I expect it'll be soon. Thanks again for your letter, and do not hesitate to contact me if and when the need arises. Yours truly, Connie Tangwa.